In the summer of 2023, Seoul recorded its hottest day since measurements began, 38.4 degrees Celsius, a temperature more commonly associated with the Sonoran Desert than a Northeast Asian capital. That is not a rounding error. That is not a single anomaly tucked inside an otherwise normal year. It sits inside a decade that the Korea Meteorological Administration describes as the fastest warming period in the country's recorded climate history. So the question is not merely whether Seoul is getting hotter. The question is how a city of 10 million people, built for monsoons and cold winters, suddenly finds itself playing by a different set of atmospheric rules. The Korea Meteorological Administration's long-term data shows that Seoul's average summer temperature has risen by roughly 1.4 degrees Celsius over the past century. But more than half of that rise has occurred since 1980. The number of so-called tropical nights, when temperatures stay above 25 degrees Celsius even after midnight, has more than doubled in Seoul over the past 30 years. In 2022, the city endured its longest heat wave stretch on record, 11 consecutive days above 35 degrees. Meanwhile, the OECD notes that South Korea's urban heat island effect is among the most intense in the developed world, partly because Seoul's population density, roughly 16,000 people per square kilometer in the inner city, concentrates heat-generating activity into an exceptionally small area. And the Korea Environment Institute projects that without significant intervention, extreme heat days could triple by the 2060s. Two forces are working in the same direction at the same time. The first is global. South Korea, like every nation, is subject to the broader warming trend driven by greenhouse gas accumulation, and the Korean peninsula's position in East Asia means it is warming faster than the global average, according to the Korea Meteorological Administration. The second force is intensely local. Seoul underwent one of the most dramatic urbanization events of the 20th century. A largely rural country transformed itself into a heavily industrialized, hyper-dense urban society within roughly 40 years. That process paved over wetlands, removed tree cover, and replaced absorbent soil with concrete and asphalt that absorbs heat during the day and releases it through the night. Air conditioning, now present in nearly every Seoul building, expels waste heat directly into the streets. The city, in other words, generates its own additional warming layer on top of the global trend. Researchers at Seoul National University have described this as a compounding effect. Global climate change sets the baseline, and the urban heat island raises the ceiling above it. Heat is not a neutral inconvenience. South Korea's Ministry of Health and Welfare reported that heat-related illness cases surged to nearly 4,000 in the summer of 2018, the majority among elderly people and outdoor laborers. The economic toll is harder to quantify precisely, but the Korea Development Institute has flagged declining labor productivity during peak heat months as a measurable drag on output. There is also an equity dimension that data alone can obscure. Residents of Seoul's older low-rise neighborhoods, many of them elderly, many on fixed incomes, live in buildings without insulation and cannot afford to run air conditioning continuously. They are statistically the most exposed, and the infrastructure assumptions baked into Seoul's design are being quietly stress-tested. The city's drainage systems were engineered around historical rainfall patterns that no longer reliably hold, as the catastrophic flooding of August 2022, which killed at least 9 people in submerged semi-basement apartments, painfully demonstrated. Seoul's story is not unique. It is an accelerated version of a pattern visible from Tokyo to London to Chicago. When rapid economic growth and dense urbanization coincide with a warming global baseline, cities effectively become heat amplifiers. The lesson is not that urbanization was wrong. It lifted millions out of poverty at extraordinary speed. The lesson is that the design assumptions embedded in that urbanization carry a long tail of consequences that arrive decades later, when the political will that built the city has moved on to other priorities. South Korea now faces what urban planners call a retrofit challenge, cooling a city that was never designed to be cool. How it responds, through green corridors, reflective surfaces, redesigned drainage, heat-vulnerable resident protections, will offer a template or a warning for every rapidly urbanizing nation watching from the global south. The climate is not waiting for the policy calendar to catch up.